welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing Return to Silent Hill, the adaptation of Silent Hill 2 brought to us by Christophe Gans, the French filmmaker responsible for the 2006 original. So let's get into it. Let's review Return to Silent Hill. So as I said, Christophe Gans returns after a 20-year absence. His original film, the 2006 Silent Hill, which was an adaptation of the original game, was a film that was definitely critically reviled at its release, though it's since developed a bit of a cult following, which I'm definitely a card-carrying member of that cult, as I definitely find it the ultimate sort of comfort horror movie with some really interesting visuals and a lot of interesting things going on under the surface, even if all the changes to the story weren't necessary and there was a lot of kind of stupid things that go on and over exposition and all that kind of stuff. There was a lot of sins that the film committed, but it also absolutely did not bore me, and it had super interesting visuals, scary moments, cool creature design, lots of great practical effects, and yes, some bad CGI, but they knew to sort of limit it, and even still, I like the CGI in this weird sort of uncanny valley sort of way. So I think there's a lot of things that work for the film, and it's one of those movies that I'll defend despite it having a bad reputation. So this was a film that I was definitely looking forward to, and even though the early reviews came in very negative, I still was willing to give it a shot. So how did it do? Unfortunately for me, I didn't even have to leave the theater yet before I already knew that I really did not like this movie. Midway through the film, or even earlier, I just kept feeling like, okay, this is going to get better at some point. Some point, the interesting things are going to start to happen. But it just never did. We had a really terrible opening that just kept leading to more uninteresting things. And the story itself is just really this weird mishmash that doesn't work on any level. It doesn't work as an adaptation, which is fine, right? I mean, I kind of have the opinion that it doesn't really matter if you copy and paste the story exactly. I know some people really do want that, and that's what they expect out of their video game adaptations, but not me. I'm totally fine with sort of choosing different ways to approach the story in a different way through a different medium, but you have to keep the core of the story, the heart of the story, what people are drawn to from it. And if you are going to adapt something that does have such an excellent story, that delves into the psychology of a character in such a interesting way, and has the visuals really have an interesting story sort of element undergirding every single visual that you see, to throw all of that away for just this really weird mishmash of things that even like it doesn't stand on its own and it doesn't stand as an adaptation and it just doesn't work on any level whatsoever. So Silent Hill 2 is one of my favorite games of all time. It's a game I've replayed multiple times. I've played the remake and I loved that as well. And it's a story that I understand well, and I understand the allure and the draw to it, and I understand the sort of deep messed up psychological things that are going on that make this weird world. And it's such a great sort of departure for the game series from that original game. But in this one, Christophe Gans decides, I kind of want to try and fuse my own Silent Hill film with Silent Hill 2, the game, with this, like, his own weird just ideas about things, while also really just going to the dumbest trends of modern filmmaking and leaning on those. He was a filmmaker that definitely always was someone that kind of like leaned on practical effects while using CGI in a way that would sort of spice things up and add little touches and flourishes, not necessarily be the whole recipe for success. In this film, first of all, it's lower budget than the previous film, and you can definitely feel it, but yet he doesn't adjust. He still relies on CGI at even a higher clip than he did in the original film, and it just looks so gross. Everything just has this weird digital slop feel to it, and it just feels like characters running through green screens, and I just hate that so much because in the first movie they took a lot of time to build the sets and design things in such a, like, painstakingly beautiful way. Like, everything really felt real and had weight to it. Now everything just feels like I said, digital slop, and it's just empty, boring visuals and just insanely intense sound, but serving no purpose. It's just trying to like annoy you and flashing imagery and things like that. It feels like the worst of like a haunted house that you go to or something like that. Nothing about it makes any sense or has any sort of actual understanding of filmmaking behind it. It all just feels like cheap, hackish filmmaking, which I hate to say because I really am a fan of Christoph Gahn, and I expected this film to look a lot better visually. And there is moments here and there that show the potential, but they're just so few and far between that I'm very frustrated by what I'm seeing because at the very least I expected the visuals to be good and to be able to draw me into the film, but really they were just so poorly executed. Yeah, the CGI monsters were really poorly executed, so we don't feel scared by any of them. I think I got jumped by like one jump scare, which was kind of effective, but for most of the runtime, it was just let's have these creepy crawlers. Let's just keep throwing a bunch of things at you, right? Just keep throwing numbers of digital monsters at you, and that'll scare you. But it wasn't really effective. I think there was a couple of moments here or there where they had some really cool effects, but that was when it was clearly present that practical effects were doing most of the work. There was a scene early on with a homeless man and the disintegration from the monster that just vomits out the bile at you. That was one that really I think was an effective kill in the movie, and it really showed that there was maybe some potential for this movie to be a lot better. But like I say, they just used flashbang imagery. It was insane. It was nothing really effective, or like I said, there was no philosophy behind what was going on. There was no understanding of the low budget nature of the project and the need to accommodate that. It was just, we're going to try and make it exactly what my vision is with CGI, and we'll just use that as a band-aid over everything, which I think is one of the worst sins of modern filmmaking. And you see it with a lot of filmmakers that used to rely on practical effects that have now sort of, I don't know if they've been enamored with the new tools that CGI and digital sort of effects can provide, but you look at someone like Paul W.S. Anderson, someone who, if you love him or hate him, was able to deliver beautiful visual movies a lot of the times. But now, when you look at something like In the Lost Lands, it's just ugly and digital slop, like I'm talking about with this movie. It's the exact same thing here with Christoph Gahn, and I find it very disappointing and just a complete sort of indictment of a lot of these filmmakers' imagination and ability to adapt to the modern times without just relying and leaning on these tools that are not supposed to be the whole driving force behind a movie, especially a horror movie that's supposed to rely on practical effects. So, from a visual and auditory perspective, this movie completely fails. It's this really dark film that's just dark digital slop that doesn't use colors that interesting. There's a few moments here and there where the color really does pop at you, but this is very few and far between. For the most part, it's just digital slop, like I'm saying. And then it's a cacophony of loud noises and flashbang imagery that serves no purpose and is just there to kind of be a constant sort of vague threat or menace, but it doesn't scare you at all. It doesn't work at all, and it's just a cheap imitation of like the effectiveness that practical effects can have, the practical use of filmmaking tools that you have at your disposal, the way you can use sound in an effective way in a horror movie, not just throwing a bunch of sounds at you until you just give in to the experience. I don't know exactly what Gon was trying to do with this because I've heard him in interviews talk about how he wanted a slower psychological sort of perspective on this movie. When they introduced him as the director for Return to Silent Hill a couple of years ago, he was like, I've matured as a filmmaker. This is going to be a different movie. This is going to be a much more psychological film. But that's not true at all. This movie doesn't, I mean, it does have psychological aspects, but the most cheap, stupid, cliche things you've ever seen. And this is really the visuals and the sound. The reason I'm harping on that at the beginning is because it's so disappointing from a filmmaker who has shown the ability to deliver on these aspects. But then it leans into his poor tendencies he already had, his poor sort of instincts when it comes to storytelling, and you can really see where this film started to go sideways. So now I'm going to break down the story a little bit, and this is, of course, your warning here for spoilers. I'm going to have to talk about spoilers a little bit to really start to talk about some of the sins that this film does with its storytelling. So that's your warning, and we're going into it. So, one of the big sins that this film commits from a storytelling perspective is the fact that it tries to sort of be a mishmash of a lot of different things, and so it doesn't hold up as an adaptation or as a film on its own. So Silent Hill 1, definitely there was some sins committed with the storytelling in that one as well, but ones that were a little bit more forgivable, just slight tweaks and variations that also created their own interesting alternative aspects to a story that we all kind of loved from the original. This, unfortunately, is not the case with this film, as we get a cult storyline that doesn't make any sense and just throws in this weird backstory to Mary that serves no purpose whatsoever within the story. It just completely undermines a lot of the psychological aspects as they completely change huge aspects of the story, which are the strongest, most compelling elements that make our characters worth following or caring about. Like they totally change and undermine all the women characters in this film by turning them all into sort of versions of Mary, turning Angela and Laura into just middle names of Mary. I just think was a really poor choice, and then turning them into sort of, I don't even know, personalities of her or aspects of her personality. I just think this was a really dumb choice, and it isn't executed well at all. So I have no idea really what Gon was even going for because it just doesn't make any damn sense. So you have all the women characters are already undermined. You have Mary who's undermined. You have Maria who doesn't make any sense in this one either. And then the way that James is presented, like, okay, people, I remember when the trailer dropped, people were like, that's not James. He doesn't look like James. And I thought that was a superficial sort of complaint. And I thought, okay, I'm going to be willing to give Gon the benefit of the doubt. Let's see what he's doing with the characterization. Unfortunately, the characterization is just way worse than even the visual aspect of his character. This is present in a lot of key moments within the story, but I think in general, one of the big inspirations for Silent Hill 2, the story, from the video game perspective, was the Dostoevsky classic Russian novel Crime and Punishment, which is about a character who really does feel the guilt over killing someone, right? Spoiler for that classic text, but it's about guilt over murder and all this philosophical and psychological stuff about Russia and things like that. It's really interesting. But then you take all of that and you incorporate it beautifully within the Silent Hill 2 storyline about a man that kills his wife who's dying. And I think that's so beautiful, and it makes James a character that we don't necessarily like after the fact. We realize, oh, he was actually did something horrible. And so this punishment, this psychological torture and hell he's been going through, was earned by his own actions. That's completely tossed away because now it's a mercy killing at the behest of his own wife telling him to do it, which is something that was not in the game at all. And so I think that's a little tweak. And like I said, I'm totally fine with doing your own thing, but that's a tweak that doesn't serve any purpose and in fact actually undermines the story a great deal, especially since you are going to be following a lot of the same beats of the story, but only in very superficial ways because you undermine almost every aspect that makes it interesting. So you have all these beats that are being brought back, Eddie's brought back, Heaven's Knights brought back, but it's all done in this stupid way that's serving a whole different story about a cult, about sort of the weird psychological state he's in as he's in this hospital and he has this therapist, James does, in the aftermath of Mary's death. And the cult aspect, like I said, just makes no sense because it's trying to sort of bring together the weirdness of the first movie, the cult aspect of the original movies that we saw in Silent Hill and Silent Hill Revelation. But I don't know why Gon's doing that because this is supposed to be its own story on its own. So this is turning me into someone who's like, you gotta just adapt the story as it is. But the thing is, if you're gonna be making changes, why would you make it so stupid and ruin a story that's so beautifully told in the original game? I don't understand. Bloober Team was able to make slight variations and tweaks and modifications and go against their expectations while still keeping the core and heart of the story within intact. So I don't understand why you would change things so drastically and ruin it in such a on such a basic level if you did love the story and you did care about things. And I know Gon's a fan of the series. You can tell, but at the same time, with something like this, it just doesn't make any sense at all. Because like I said, you're just ruining the whole big core of the story about the guilt over killing your own wife. And you're just turning into just, I guess you feel bad because you left her now. That's the twist, because you left her alone with the cult that's from her dad that's been poisoning her since she was a child. I just think that's a very stupid way to go, and I think it's something that shows the worst instincts of Gon have not developed or gotten any better, and he definitely wasn't trying to make a psychological film, at least not one that makes any sense, right? Because if you were trying to make a psychological film, you already had the perfect psychological storyline. You didn't have to completely undermine it and make it completely pointless and worthless, and then it just, I mean, there's no re-examination of this story. There's no anything. It's just like, okay, I guess he's just tormented by the loss and the grief of everything as opposed to the overwhelming guilt and the sexual anxiety and the frustrations he was dealing with. None of that's there because he wasn't even present for most of her illness until the very end. Right there when he's like, they're like, okay, well, I'm just kill you now after like 5 minutes of dealing with you. It just, it seems really stupid, and it's turning me into, like I said, someone who's like, you just gotta adapt the story completely accurately, which is not something I'm ever like. But when you're gonna be making such stupid choices like they do in this film, it's mind blowing, and it's something that's just not acceptable for a modern horror movie. Even if it was its own film, the storytelling is just so poor that you just can't care about any of these characters. And when the visuals and like the auditory experience of everything is so poor, you have to at least deliver on the writing, and you didn't deliver on any aspect of this film, and it's just very disappointing. I also want to talk a little bit about the way they used Pyramid Head in this film. It's another example of just complete stupidity. So, in the game, Pyramid Head's supposed to represent a lot of things about James's psychological state, about his sexual frustration, about a lot of things he's feeling in relation to Mary, and about what's happening as a result of her illness to him on a very kind of selfish, egotistical perspective from him that's sort of being represented in this sort of physical way. None of that carries over at all. And like I said, there's so many psychological aspects of the game that don't carry over well into this movie that's supposedly gone on to make psychological. That it's like, what are you even doing? Did you even play the game? Did you even understand it on a deep sort of level in any way? Because why are we seeing that James is Pyramid Head? Why are we getting that zoom in? And why are we getting him to control so many things? And he kills Maria. He makes the active choice to do that. That is just stupid. It's agonizing. And look, I think maybe this is partly why I like the first one better, is because the changes he made, yes, there was some serious changes, but most of them were still serving the kind of core story, which also it wasn't as expertly told in the first game. I mean, the story is good, but it's not as expertly told. There's a lot of other strengths of the first game, whereas the second game, the story is really well told, and it's already perfectly psychological and a great mix of that and horror and drama and getting us to care about these characters. But all of that is tossed aside here. All of that is tossed aside in favor of some of the worst storytelling in modern horror filmmaking that I've seen in a while. It's just, I keep saying stupid, but that's just what keeps coming back to mind. It's just a brainless way of approaching filmmaking with no understanding or any intent behind any of the things that are being done. I would really love to know what Gon thought he was doing with this film, because none of it makes sense to me at all, and it's really disappointing for such a beloved game to get such a horrible adaptation, which is just gonna throw a lot of people off maybe playing the game because they're like, well, this sucks. Why would I want to play that? But yeah, it's just disappointing. I feel bad for a lot of the fans of Silent Hill 2 because we deserve something better than this, I think. And in general, Silent Hill has a lot of space room to move around as like an interesting horror franchise from a film or television perspective. And yet, since that original movie, which, like I said, I love that movie, but since then it's just been a complete mess. Revelation was terrible. This one was terrible. So there isn't a lot to praise about this movie. The acting is also a bit underwhelming. Jeremy Irvine was just not good as James. Hannah Emily Anderson, someone who I liked her character in Jigsaw, she just wasn't. I don't know if it was just her fault or if it was the writing's fault because they really did undermine Mary a lot. But and she does okay, and she looks like Maria for sure and Mary and things like that. But it doesn't work, honestly. I don't think that she had the chance to be a good character, and I don't think she necessarily delivered a great performance either. So really, just none of the characters are interesting, and I hated the way that they used iconic moments. Like we got to see a lot of things that were delivered okay on screen. Like they looked like some of the moments from the games, but then it just serves no purpose. Like why did Eddie even have to be in this movie? He was just in it for a second, and he's never brought up again. We never get any sort of anything out of that moment. It's just like one little one-off moment with him, James, and Laura, which serves no purpose. Laura is, I think, not as interesting. I think, all the female characters are. I mean, Angela, like we get no, it just gets subsumed into some larger story that doesn't make any sense. Whereas the Angela thing was a huge individual sort of subplot within the original game. And maybe it's the runtime. Maybe it's just too short of a movie as well. Maybe that's part of the problem. So everything kind of got like scrunched together, and maybe that's part of the low budget. But maybe then don't use CGI on so many things. Use practical effects. Actually lean on smart filmmaking choices to accommodate the kind of budget you're making a movie on. And I think that Gon just kind of didn't want to actually make the sacrifices that would have made a better movie. He didn't have the understanding of what he was working with. You have to work with what you have, not with what you hope to have. And I think a lot of filmmakers, they get enamored with the new tools that are out there, and they just think, well, I can just do whatever I want in my head and it can be represented. But it looks ugly. It looks disgusting. I don't know why any filmmaker would think that this looks acceptable, and why any of these storytelling choices make any sense from a fan of the Silent Hill franchise. It's just beyond me, and I think this is really a big disappointment and something that I've been looking forward to for years that has really let me down. And I think that's a bad thing, but at the end of the day, you still can learn, about filmmaking, about films from bad movies just as much as from good movies. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from how this movie went wrong. And I think, so from that perspective, if you're someone who is a student of film, someone who wants to learn and what makes a good movie, what makes a bad movie, this is a great film to understand a lot of the pitfalls that genre filmmaking is falling into in the modern day. So that's definitely something that is at least a positive that can be taken out of this experience, even if the movie itself was a complete mess on so many different levels. So, yeah, I think that's all I really have to say in this review. This was kind of more of a rant than anything. I'm just very disappointed in this movie, and I think you probably are too if you're watching this video, or I wouldn't recommend going and watching this movie. It's not worth it. I mean, if you're a huge Silent Hill fan, I guess it's more Silent Hill content, and so from that perspective, I guess you can't go wrong, and you can at least have something to sort of whet your appetite for an actual good Silent Hill story. But yeah, from any sort of fan perspective, I can't imagine too many fans are going to end up liking this movie. I've seen a few people defend it online. There's been a few defenders of the film, and look, I always can appreciate people that take alternative takes on movies, and I know I surely have a lot of alternative takes on movies that are hated by a lot of people, and especially by the critics. But this, to me, is not one of those movies that rises above its reputation. It absolutely earned its reputation in the single digits in Rotten Tomatoes and things like that, and I think that's sad as hell, but it is what it is, and I'm glad that you guys listened to my rant for this long, and if you have any sort of comments about the film, about Silent Hill in general, about any of the movies or games, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications every time I drop a new video. Again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.